Oh, speaking of devil. Yo, Myron, man, what's going on, dude? I was just telling Fresh I'm doing that video about you guys. Yeah.
You're a clout chaser! You're a clout chasing
No,
bum,
first
bro!
of all, I have a First Amendment constitutional right to say what I want. And second of all, I have a Second Amendment constitutional right to stand my ground on this. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what that means.
Allow me to reintroduce myself.
I'm a lot of things. A rapper is not one of them. I'm wearing pink pants, for God's sake. I've been known to dress like this. One thing that is true, however, is what Myron said. I am clout chasing. So, since you're here already, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification so you know when the next video drops. So what's today's video about? Standing your ground, the Second Amendment, and a little bit of the First Amendment as well. What I mean? Stand by. Let's talk about it. As your boy JJTP always has to remind you, this does not constitute legal advice. That being said, let's talk about it. The Second Amendment and standing your ground. What does that actually mean? What do you do, and what rights do you have when someone turns up to your house like this?
We want the smoke! We want the smoke!
The reason why I bring up the Fresh and Fit podcast is because this happened to them recently. Let's take a look. So you guys thought I was clout chasing. I might have missed the wave, but this is an actual teachable moment about the Second Amendment. And what do you do when you're sitting at home and the next thing you know is this is happening?
So step outside, you come on in.
Well, this is America, and we have a Second Amendment right to bear arms. But what does the Second Amendment actually say? The Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution grants U.S. citizens the right to bear arms. Sometimes the use of that right results in the loss of life. But if there's a loss of life, is there a crime? Not necessarily. In the law, there's a concept called justifiable homicide. Since Fresh and Fit is filmed in Florida, let's take a look at the statute there, which is Florida Statute 782.03. As you see on the screen, the statute establishes 3 situations which can be classified as excusable homicide. The concept of excusable homicide can also be applied to the Stand Your Ground laws. But what is that? Let's take a look. The concept behind Stand Your Ground's laws is based on the Castle Doctrine, which dates back hundreds of years. The idea is that you don't have a duty to retreat from a place that you legally occupy, and you have a right to defend yourself. In U.S. jurisprudence, we can date the concept all the way back to 1876 in the Ohio case Irwin v. State. In that case, you can find the famous quote you see on the screen. The opposite of stand your ground is a duty to retreat. The concept here is that you need to exhaust all your remedies trying to escape before you can use deadly force if you want to claim self-defense. This concept was rejected by Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in 1821, and is only the law in a minority of states. Generally speaking, the Castle Doctrine is the minimum default. On the screen, you can see a scroll of which states only have the Castle Doctrine, and which have stand your ground laws. At the end here, there's also a chart which tells what type of self-defense law each state has, for your reference. So I know what you're thinking. No, just because you get into a beef with someone does not necessarily mean they have a right to shoot you. Also, it's important to note that these are state laws. There is no federal stand your ground law. That being said, let's take a look at one state, the state we're talking about in specific, Florida. Florida statute was signed into law in 2005 by Governor Jeb Bush. It's codified at section 776012 and 13. It provides, among other things, that a person no longer has a duty to retreat as they did under the common law, and grants immunity from prosecution when self-defense is claimed under the parameter of the Stand Your Ground statute. The statute eliminates the duty to retreat anywhere when defending yourself or someone else from the commission of a felony. Specifically, the statute says a forcible felony, and the duty to retreat is removed in section 776.0122. Subsection 4 provides specifically that a person who unlawfully enters or attempts to enter someone's home is presumed to do so with the intent to commit unlawful act of force or violence. This will be important later. Remember the word unlawfully. Previously, the law provides immunity from prosecution in Section 776.0324. Section 776.0133 lists 4 scenarios which are exceptions, including the first one, where the person is lawfully present. Third, which says if the person threatening the force is engaged in criminal activity, is also interesting, for reasons we'll see in a little bit. Many people first heard of these laws in the tragic case of Trayvon Martin, who was killed by George Zimmerman, who used this law to escape prosecution. But that's not always the case. In another case in 2010, ironically with the same prosecutor, Marissa Alexander was sentenced to 20 years in prison for aggravated assault for wounding her allegedly abusive ex-husband. See if you can tell a difference between the two people. I'm not going to say anything. What you're thinking is only one of the criticisms of the Stand Your Ground laws, but there are several others. Let's take a look at some of those. Stand Your Ground laws have actually led to an increase in killings in states that have them. In cases where white shooters shoot black victims, it's 5 times more likely that it will be considered justified compared to the reverse. In any given month in the United States, 30 to 50 people are killed due to the Stand Your Ground laws. Looking at Florida specifically, we see that multiple studies have shown that Stand Your Ground law has actually increased violence across the state. Most shockingly is that last number. In 79% of the cases, the assailant actually could have retreated and avoided the confrontation and loss of life. In 68% of the cases, the person was actually unarmed, which brings us back to this case. Remember the things we noted earlier. No, not whether you're going to die. We said that the person who the force was going to be used against had to be in a place that they were not allowed to be. Second, we said that the person using the force had to show that they weren't committing a crime. But was Myron committing a crime? Let's take a look at that. Let's look at this from another angle. There's something that was said in the video of the confrontation earlier that I hope you legal eagles caught. It's going to be said again in this video. So here's another video of the confrontation. Tell me if you hear it.
It's worth it to prove to the world that you ain't nothing.
Alright, step aside and let's see you prove to the world.
I already did.
Step aside, prove to the world.
Stop trying to incriminate me.
Step aside. Step aside, bro. You already broke in. You already broke in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To defend your house. You
Okay.
Defend
Come on
your
in.
house.
Come on in. It's gonna be the last time you live. Come on in right
Last
now.
time I lived.
Yep.
You
Come
got
in
in my
right
life.
now, bro. Come in right now. Come in right now, bro.
I hope you got that. Remember, the person has to be someplace they legally were not allowed to be. But if you were invited in, then you were legally allowed to be there. And we hear multiple times where he invites him in. Can you start a fight, bring someone into your house, and then say they legally were not allowed to be there? That doesn't sound right. Second issue is that we hear Myron clearly say that's going to be the last thing that he does. Which the guy says, "Are you threatening my life?" Which means he clearly took it as a threat to his life. Doesn't that mean that he has a right to stand his ground now at this point? It gets very confusing here. I mean, we've all gotten to that spot in a fight, we're all amped up on adrenaline, and we say something like this.
This is where we fight! This is where they die!
The question is that a crime? Well, let's take a look at that. Generally speaking, in the common law, assault is when you make someone feel they are reasonably in danger of bodily harm. It doesn't actually require you to actually touch the person. That's a battery. States don't generally follow the common law. They tend to have their own statutes regarding what assault is. In Florida, that's 784.011. It requires an intentional, unlawful threat of words to do violence to another person, coupled with the fact that the violence can actually be done, which creates a well-rounded fear that such violence is imminent. What's important to note here is, if the violence can't be done, then it's not an assault. But in this case, he actually did have the gun in his hand, and he very well could have ended his life. The question as to whether it was a well-rounded fear is what the juries mostly look at in these cases. But it should be noted that second-degree assault is punishable by up to 60 days in prison in Florida. If the threat is written, the punishment is actually much more steep. So now you're asking, what about my First Amendment rights? Aren't I protected by those? Well, let's take a look at that. As we all know, the First Amendment guarantees us the right to freedom of speech. But what some people don't realize is that it only applies to the federal government and government action, not to everyone. When it comes to state action, we need to look to the 14th Amendment and the incorporation doctrine. As we see in the chart, the First Amendment is fully incorporated. So that means you can say whatever you want, right? Without fear of government prosecution? No. there are certain things you can't say. You can't threaten people. But there's a caveat to that as well. That is the true threats doctrine, which basically says that the government can't prosecute you unless they can show you had a serious intent to commit an act of violence against an individual or individuals. The idea behind this comes from the case of Watts v. United States in 1969, where, ironically, a young black man was jailed after making a statement that was deemed hyperbolic, which was accused of being a threat. This case had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. But they've actually never defined what a true threat is. A true threat? Well, the important takeaway is that it's one of the categories of speech, like obscenity, child pornography, fighting words, and acts threatening imminent lawlessness, that aren't protected by the First Amendment. Again, to reemphasize, the government can't punish your speech unless they can prove that you had an intent to actually do harm. Some courts have looked at what they call the Watts factors: the context of the statement, the reaction of the recipient, and whether the threat was conditional. In summary, did the speaker actually mean to make a threat? Luckily, everyone walked away from this internet beef without anyone being harmed. It probably would be all but forgotten, but for me, stirring the pot. To be clear, I'm not saying that Myron could or would be prosecuted, but the truth is, as the old saying goes, the law is really what the judge had for breakfast that morning. And as we've seen in some of the cases that I spoke about, sometimes other factors go in that really kind of shouldn't, but they still do. What I'm saying is, be safe. But since you stuck with me this long, I got a little bonus fact for you. Let's mess with Texas. They say everything's bigger in Texas, and that includes their Stand Your Ground law. Because in Texas, it's the only state where you can use Stand Your Ground to protect your property. What do I mean by that? Well, the law says, as you can see, if you reasonably believe that your property can't be recovered, you're allowed to use deadly force to stop the person from taking your property. That's right, you could shoot someone just for taking your stuff.
Which I think is a crazy state to begin with, and I mean that just as I said it.
What's important here is be safe. Live to fight another day. These things aren't worth losing your life over or going to jail. Know your rights and limitations.
And knowing is half the battle.
Well, that's it for today's episode. I hope you learned something. Maybe it could save your life one day. Oh, you still want to learn more about the law? That's easy. I know you already hit the subscribe button, so hit the bell notification. This way you know when the next knowledge nugget's going to drop. I know you already hit the like button. You know it! Exactly. Well, until next time, stay safe. Judge JJTP justice has been served.
There's one thing you can expect from me, and that's the unexpected. 'Cause I'm an international super spy. Super spy!